I want you to imagine this for a moment. You're sitting alone, perhaps in a quiet room, or maybe in the middle of a bustling city. You pause, close your eyes, and ask yourself, who am I? Really not the person you show to others. Not the roles you play, the friend, the professional, the parent. I mean the core of who you are. Do you know the answer? Or is it a question you'd rather avoid? This video isn't about easy answers. It's about a journey inspired by the work of Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology and philosophy. Jung believed that most of us live our lives as strangers to ourselves, wearing masks to fit into the world, suppressing parts of who we are, and unknowingly guided by forces within us we don't even understand. But he also believed that through the process of self-exploration, we could uncover our true nature, achieve wholeness, and live authentically. By the end of this video, you'll understand how to begin this process, what Jung called individuation, and more importantly, you'll leave with powerful questions that will challenge you to see yourself in ways you never imagined. So, are you ready to look within? Let's begin. I often think about how much of life is spent avoiding the very thing we fear the most, facing ourselves. And it's not hard to see why. When we look in the mirror, we don't just see our appearance, we see our flaws, our doubts, our mistakes, and the terrifying possibility that we might not know who we are at all. But Carl Jung believed that this discomfort, this fear of looking inward, is precisely where the path to our true self begins. Let me ask you this: how often do you feel like you're wearing a mask? Maybe it's at work, where you pretend to be confident and composed even when you're unsure. Maybe it's with friends, where you laugh along to jokes that don't resonate with you just to fit in. Or maybe it's with family, where you play the role they expect of you, even when it doesn't feel authentic. These masks, which Jung called the persona, are a necessary part of life. They help us navigate social situations, maintain relationships, and meet the expectations of society. But here's the problem: when we confuse the mask with the face beneath, we lose touch with who we really are.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
To understand this, let's take a deeper look at the persona. Jung described it as the mask we wear to interact with the world. It's not inherently bad, in fact, it's essential. Imagine a teacher who hides their frustration to provide a supportive learning environment for their students, or a leader who projects confidence to inspire their team, even when they feel uncertain. The persona allows us to function in society. But what happens when the mask becomes a prison? I'll give you an example. Think of someone who's always the life of the party. They're charming, outgoing, and the center of attention. But when they're alone, they feel hollow, disconnected, and unsure of who they are. Why? Because they've over-identified with their persona. They've mistaken the mask they wear in public for their true self. This disconnection creates what Jung called inauthenticity. And over time, it can lead to burnout, identity crises, or the haunting feeling that something is missing from life. So here's the first question I want you to reflect on: what masks do you wear, and when do you wear them? Are you the responsible one in your family, the overachiever at work, or the agreeable friend who avoids conflict? Take a moment to really think about this, because until we become conscious of our masks, we can't take the first step toward authenticity. Now let's talk about the second layer of the self that Jung believed we must confront: the shadow. If the persona is the mask we present to the world, the shadow is everything we hide: our fears, insecurities, impulses, and desires that we've deemed unacceptable. It's the part of us we push into the unconscious because we're ashamed of it or because society tells us it's wrong. But here's the paradox: the more we repress the shadow, the more power it has over us. Think about a time when you overreacted to someone else's behavior. Maybe you lashed out at a friend for being selfish, or you judged a colleague for being arrogant. Jung would say that what you're really reacting to is your own shadow. The traits you dislike in others often reflect the traits you've rejected in yourself. This is called projection, and if we're honest, we all do it. Let me share a personal example. I once knew someone who prided themselves on being selfless. They were always putting others first, going out of their way to help friends and family. But whenever they saw someone who was even slightly selfish, they would become enraged. It was only when they began exploring their shadow that they realized the truth they, too, had selfish desires. But instead of acknowledging them, they had repressed them, creating a shadow that controlled their reactions. Jung believed that to see your true self, you must confront your shadow. This means acknowledging the parts of yourself you've rejected, not to judge them, but to understand them. When you do this, something incredible happens. The shadow loses its grip on you. You stop projecting your insecurities onto others, and you gain the freedom to act authentically. So here's the next question for you. What traits or feelings have you rejected in yourself, and how might they be influencing your life? This isn't an easy question to answer, but it's one of the most important steps on the path to self-discovery. Now, let's shift our focus to the deeper layers of the unconscious. According to Jung, beneath the shadow lies something even more profound, the anima or animus. These are the contrasexual aspects of our psyche, the feminine qualities within men and the masculine qualities within women. In a world that often enforces rigid gender roles, these parts of ourselves are frequently suppressed. But Jung believed that integrating these qualities is essential for wholeness. For example, consider a man who's been taught that emotions are a sign of weakness. He suppresses his sensitivity, hides his vulnerability, and presents himself as stoic and unemotional. But over time, this repression creates a disconnect within him. He struggles to form deep connections with others, and he feels a sense of emptiness that he can't explain. Jung would say that this man needs to reconnect with his anima, his inner feminine, by embracing his emotions and allowing himself to be vulnerable. The same is true for women who suppress their animus, their inner masculine. Maybe they've been taught to be nurturing and accommodating at the expense of their assertiveness and independence. Over time, this creates an imbalance that limits their potential. To achieve wholeness, they must embrace their inner strength, confidence, and action-oriented qualities. So here's another question for you. What qualities have you suppressed because they don't align with societal expectations of your gender? By exploring and integrating these aspects of yourself, you can achieve a deeper sense of balance and authenticity. Finally, we come to the ultimate goal of Jung's philosophy, the self. The self is not just the center of your psyche, it's the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious. It's the part of you that strives for wholeness, that seeks to integrate all the fragmented pieces of your identity into a harmonious whole, but accessing the self requires a willingness to face the unknown. Jung often compared the self to a mandala, a symbol of unity and balance. Imagine a circle with the ego at the center and the unconscious surrounding it. Most of us live within the confines of the ego, unaware of the vast potential that lies beyond it. But when we begin the process of individuation, when we confront our persona, shadow, and anima, or animus, we expand our consciousness and move closer to the self. So I'll leave you with this final question. What would it mean to live as your true self, free from masks, projections, and societal expectations? This is not a question you can answer in a single moment. It's a question that will guide you for the rest of your life. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to commend you. It's not easy to look inward. Most of us spend our lives running from the very things we're exploring here, our masks, our shadows, and the parts of ourselves we've suppressed. But the fact that you're still here means you're willing to take that first step toward uncovering your true self. So let's continue. We ended the last section with a question: what would it mean to live as your true self, free from masks, projections, and societal expectations? It's a question that cuts to the heart of Carl Jung's philosophy. But before we can answer it, we need to understand what it means to integrate the different parts of ourselves. Integration is not about perfection. It's not about eliminating the parts of you that feel messy, flawed, or contradictory. Instead, it's about embracing those parts and finding a way to bring them into harmony. Jung believed that the process of individuation, the journey toward the self, required us to unite the opposites within us, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine. Only then can we begin to live authentically. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone who's always been a people pleaser. They go out of their way to make others happy, often at the expense of their own needs. On the surface, this might seem like a positive trait. After all, they're kind, selfless, and easy to get along with. But beneath the surface, there's a shadow. Maybe they feel resentment toward the people they're always trying to please. Maybe they secretly long to assert themselves but are afraid of being rejected. If this person wants to see their true self, they need to confront their shadow. They need to ask themselves, why do I feel the need to always put others first? What am I afraid of if I assert my own needs? These questions might lead to uncomfortable answers. Maybe they'll realize that their people-pleasing is rooted in a fear of abandonment, or that they've been suppressing their anger for years, and it's now manifesting as passive aggressiveness. But here's the beautiful part: once they acknowledge these truths, they can begin to integrate them. They can learn to assert themselves without feeling guilty. They can find a balance between caring for others and caring for themselves. And in doing so, they'll move closer to their true self. This brings us to another profound insight from Jung: the parts of ourselves we reject often hold the key to our growth. Think about that for a moment. The traits you dislike in yourself, the ones you've spent years trying to hide or suppress, might actually be your greatest source of strength. Let me ask you this: what part of yourself are you most ashamed of? Maybe it's your anger, your jealousy, your fear, or your insecurity. Whatever it is, I want you to consider this possibility: that part of you isn't your enemy. It's a part of you that's been misunderstood, neglected, and pushed into the shadows. And until you bring it into the light, it will continue to control you. Jung believed that the shadow wasn't inherently evil. It's simply the parts of us that have been denied expression. And when we embrace the shadow, we don't become worse people, we become whole people. Let's talk about another key aspect of integration: the anima and animus. This is one of the most challenging parts of the self to confront, because it requires us to question deeply ingrained beliefs about gender, identity, and societal expectations. Imagine a woman who's always been taught to be nurturing, accommodating, and self-sacrificing. She's internalized the belief that her worth is tied to how much she gives to others. But deep down, there's a part of her that longs to be assertive, independent, and ambitious. This is her animus, the masculine aspect of her psyche. Now imagine a man who's been taught that masculinity means being strong, stoic, and unemotional. He's spent his entire life suppressing his vulnerability, creativity, and sensitivity. But deep down, there's a part of him that longs to connect with others on a deeper level, to express his emotions freely, and to embrace his creativity. This is his anima, the feminine aspect of his psyche. In both cases, these contrasexual aspects of the psyche have been repressed because they don't fit society's expectations. But Jung believed that true selfhood requires us to embrace these parts of ourselves. For the woman, This might mean stepping into her power, setting boundaries, and pursuing her ambitions unapologetically. For the man, this might mean allowing himself to be vulnerable, expressing his emotions, and creating without fear of judgment. So, here's another question for you. What qualities have you suppressed because they don't align with society's expectations of who you should be? Take some time to reflect on this, because the qualities you've suppressed might be the very ones that will set you free. Now, let's return to the idea of the self. Jung believed that the self is the archetype of wholeness. It's the part of us that exists beyond the ego, beyond the masks, shadows, and societal roles we play. The self is both who we are and who we have the potential to become. It's vast, mysterious, and deeply connected to the collective unconscious, the shared reservoir of human experience. But here's the catch: the self isn't something you can fully understand or control. It's not a destination you arrive at or a puzzle you solve. It's a process, a lifelong journey of exploration and integration. To access the self, we must be willing to face the unknown. This means embracing uncertainty, letting go of rigid identities, and being open to change. It means acknowledging that we are not fixed, static beings, but dynamic, ever-evolving processes. Let me ask you this: what would it mean to let go of who you think you are and embrace who you might become? This is not an easy question to answer. It requires courage, humility, and a willingness to step into the unknown. As we near the end of this section, I want to leave you with a metaphor that Jung often used: the mandala. A mandala is a circular symbol that represents wholeness, unity, and balance. Jung believed that the self is like a mandala, a circle with the ego at the center and the unconscious surrounding it. Most of us live within the confines of the ego, unaware of the vast potential that lies beyond it. But as we begin the process of individuation by confronting our persona, shadow, and anima, or animus, we expand our consciousness and move closer to the self. Imagine your life as a blank mandala. Every experience, every challenge, and every insight adds a new layer to the circle. The more you explore, the more complete the mandala becomes. But the mandala is never finished. It's a living, breathing representation of your journey toward wholeness. So I'll leave you with this thought: the journey to see your true self is not about becoming someone new. It's about uncovering the person you've always been. It's about peeling back the layers of masks, shadows, and societal expectations until you arrive at the core of your being. And when you get there, you won't find perfection. You'll find contradictions, complexities, and mysteries. But you'll also find freedom. Because to see your true self is to embrace all that you are: the light and the dark, the known and the unknown, the conscious and the unconscious. Take a moment to reflect on this. What would it feel like to live as your true self, without fear, without shame, and without pretense?